Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
Imagine standing in downtown Lancaster City today. You're just stuck at a red light. You're watching cars idling in traffic, exhaust curling up into the air.
Everyone's just staring at their phones.
Right, exactly. Staring at phones, gripping their steering wheels, completely isolated in these little metal and glass boxes just waiting for the light to change. And you look around and it's just a typical modern, congested American city grid.
Yeah, it feels completely permanent.
It does. But you're completely unaware that a century ago, this exact spot where you were sitting in traffic was the beating heart of an electrified empire.
An empire that moved, 12 million people a year?
Yeah, 12 million. Long before anyone had a commuter car, you're basically driving over the ghosts of a massive transit network.
Yeah.
And today we're excavating exactly how that empire, dictated human behavior.
Yeah.
And why it vanished almost overnight.
It's such a fascinating collapse.
It really is. And we're pulling from a deep stack of sources today, specifically the exhaustive archives of the Journal of the Lancaster County Historical Society, Volume 80, Number 1, alongside some retrospective analyses of the infamous Pequea trolley.
Oh, the Pequea line.
Yeah, we'll get into that. And also the minute-by-minute historical account of the absolute worst transit disaster in the county's history.
Which is just a harrowing read. And the goal here goes far beyond just a nostalgic tour of antique streetcars.
Right.
We are looking at a masterclass in infrastructure life cycle, like the birth, the zenith, and the incredibly violent death of Lancaster's trolley empire serves as a perfect mirror for our own modern technological shifts.
For sure.
It demonstrates how rapidly a technological marvel can achieve absolute societal dominance, physically reshape the geography of a region, and then, face complete unceremonious obsolescence.
It's just gone.
Exactly. It forces us to examine the very ground we stand on and ask what multi-billion-dollar systems we are building today that might simply vanish tomorrow.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the sheer physical reality of 1874 Lancaster County is where we really need to anchor this.
We have to start with the dirt.
Right. Before we get to the sparking wires and the massive streetcars, we have to talk about the mud and the mules. I mean, to appreciate the friction of moving through the world back then, you have to look at the ground.
The ground dictated literally everything. Travel in rural Pennsylvania in the 1870s was a grueling, agonizing endeavor dictated entirely by the seasons.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, in the height of summer, the roads were these narrow, unpaved corridors choked with just blinding, suffocating dust. But the winter and spring were far worse. The freeze-thaw cycle turned those dirt roads into deeply rutted, freezing mud.
Ugh, miserable.
The coefficient of friction was staggering. Moving a heavy wooden wagon wheel through deep sucking mud required an immense amount of caloric energy from draft animals. And it was devastatingly slow.
I read that the mud would literally suck the boots right off your feet. If you were a rural citizen, your geographic world was incredibly small.
Yeah.
Bounded by how far a horse could drag a carriage before collapsing.
Exactly. A trip of just 5 miles could take hours of bone-jarring, miserable travel.
Which is why the introduction of the very first public transit line in Lancaster County in November 1874 was such a seismic shift. And this is even before electricity entered the picture.
Wait, so it was just horses?
Yeah, the Lancaster and Millersville Passenger Railway Company constructed a horse-drawn streetcar line to replace an old stagecoach route. The leap in efficiency here wasn't the propulsion. It was still a horse, but it was the surface.
Oh, the rails.
Right. Placing a steel wheel on a steel rail reduces the rolling resistance by orders of magnitude compared to a wooden wheel in mud. So suddenly, a single horse could pull a much larger, heavier car carrying dozens of people smoothly and reliably.
And the primary demographic driving this initial innovation is something any modern college town can relate to. It was students.
Of course it was.
Yeah, the line was built specifically to shuttle students back and forth from Lancaster City to the Millersville Normal School, which, we know today is Millersville University.
And the logistics of serving that specific demographic required immediate operational adaptation. Like, the historical journal details how the company had to arrange for a dedicated baggage car at the start and end of the fall and spring semesters.
Because of all the luggage.
Right. They were moving these massive, heavy wooden steamer trunks for hundreds of students.
The route itself was highly specific, too. The horse car would depart from the Brunswick Hotel, travel along Manor Street, and then terminate at the corner of South George and West Frederick in Millersville.
And that took, what, about half an hour?
Yeah, the whole trip took 30 minutes, rain or shine, mud or dust. And the trolley barn where they stored the cars and stabled the horses on West Frederick Street is actually still standing today.
Wow, really?
Yeah. But obviously, the physical limitations of animal traction put a hard ceiling on growth. The true paradigm shift, like the spark that actually built the empire that hits in 1891.
The electrification. That fundamentally altered the region's relationship with time and distance. On May 21st, 1890, the Lancaster Street Railway Company, which had, begun consolidating some smaller lines, conducted a test of their new electric system.
I would have loved to see that.
It was a huge deal. A massive crowd gathered at North Duke and East King Street purely to witness a vehicle move under its own power.
We take invisible power for granted today, right? But watching a heavy car surge forward without a beast of burden pulling it, it must have looked like literal magic to them.
Oh, absolutely.
And the physical mechanism of it is so cool. Drawing high voltage direct current from an overhead wire down a trolley pole, feeding it into a massive electric motor slung under the floorboards and turning steel wheels. I mean, it was cutting-edge industrial technology applied to local commuting.
And it completely rewired the local economy. The speed was thrilling, certainly, but the true revolution was the reliability and the volume. A journey that used to take half a day and depended on, the stamina of a horse, now took a fraction of the time.
And it ran on a schedule.
Exactly, a strict schedule, and it could carry 50 people at once. This single technological leap cemented Lancaster City as the undisputed commercial, cultural, and transportation center of the entire county.
And Capital recognized this immediately, which leads to this aggressive, completely chaotic expansion phase. Like, the financial landscape of the early 1890s trolley boom reads exactly like the 1990s dot-com bubble.
Or the rideshare app frenzy.
Yes. You have a disruptive new technology, and suddenly the floodgates of speculative capital burst open. It became a frantic land grab. Wealthy financiers and rival syndicates from Philadelphia and New York just descended on Lancaster.
Snapping up municipal charters left and right.
Exactly, laying down tracks as fast as legally and physically possible. They were desperate to corner the market before their rivals could.
And the scale of the financial maneuvering was just staggering for the era. In 1893, a syndicate operating under the name the Pennsylvania Traction Company, or PTC, led by an ex-United States Senator named John J. Patterson, executed a massive buyout.
How massive?
They purchased the Lancaster Traction Company for approximately $1 million.
$1 million in 1893. That represents astronomical venture capital.
Right.
And their ambition totally matched the price tag. The PTC didn't just want a monopoly over local city rates.
Oh, no. They thought much bigger.
They envisioned a massive, continuous electric street railway system linking Philadelphia all the way to Harrisburg, utilizing Lancaster as the central hub of this massive trans-state network. And they estimated the cost of this scheme at between $4 and $5 million.
But the hubris of the PTC is it's a classic study in overextension. They assumed infinite growth and took on massive, unsustainable debt to fuel their rapid expansion.
As you do in a bubble.
Right. They issued two separate bonds in 1894 for $2 million and $2.5 million. But the physical reality of laying miles of steel track across rugged topography, battling rival companies for rights of way, and, constructing the power generation infrastructure required to push direct current over those distances, it completely overwhelmed their balance sheet.
They were burning cash faster than they could lay track. And when you rely on that much speculative debt, any disruption to your revenue stream is fatal.
Yep.
By 1896, unable to meet their massive financial commitments, the PTC just collapsed into bankruptcy. The United States courts ultimately ordered the entire sprawling, half-finished system to be sold off.
But that financial collapse didn't erase the immense public demand for the trolley. The demand was still there. It merely wiped out the initial speculators and created a fire sale for the next, more pragmatic syndicate.
Enter the CTC.
Enter the Conestoga Traction Company. In November 1899, the CTC emerged from the ashes, purchasing the ruined assets of the PTC. And under the leadership of its president, William B. Given, the CTC took those chaotic, disjointed pieces and engineered them into what would become one of the most efficient, pervasive electric street railway systems in the United States.
And they achieved that dominance through a really ruthless, highly disciplined application of the hub and spoke model.
Right, a classic logistics model.
Lancaster City served as the central hub, and radiating outwards were these incredibly long, dedicated spokes. 7 main routes utilizing heavy interurban trolleys that were like the size of modern city buses.
They were massive.
Yeah, and these weren't just city commuter lines. These steel spokes reached deep into the surrounding rural towns and isolated farm villages.
And the expansion timeline under the CTC was relentless and highly strategic. I mean, they reached Columbia in February 1900, Strasburg in December 1901, Adamstown in May 1903, Blue Ball in 1904, Lehman Place in 1906, Elizabethtown in 1908.
There's a blitz.
It really was. Ultimately, the CTC ran west to Marietta, north to Mannheim and Lidditz, and northeast to Ephrata and Terre Hill. And by pushing these high-tech electric lines deep into the agricultural hinterlands, the CTC accidentally engineered a profound cultural and economic bridge.
The visual juxtaposition alone is so fascinating to picture. You have a side-of-road, high-voltage electric transit system running directly through traditional Amish farm country. Like, imagine a sparking, buzzing trolley hurtling down a rural road, passing a horse-drawn plow. But this wasn't just a clash of eras. It was a deeply integrated supply chain. The CTC recognized that rural viability depended on moving freight, not just people. So they introduced the combines.
Oh, the combines were a brilliant logistical adaptation. They were specialized, dual-purpose trolley cars.
What, half and half?
Exactly. One section was outfitted with standard seating for passengers, while the other section was completely stripped down and dedicated to carrying farm freight, specifically highly perishable goods like fresh produce and raw milk.
The integration with the dairy industry is a perfect example of how infrastructure unlocks entirely new economies. The CTC lines physically connected with neighboring trolley networks, including the Hershey Transit Company.
Which is huge.
Yeah, so during the sweltering heat of a Pennsylvania summer, Amish farmers would load huge metal cans of fresh, completely uncooled raw milk onto a Conestoga Traction Combine car.
And the thermodynamics of raw milk in summer demand incredible speed to prevent spoiling. Before the interurban trolley, shipping fresh milk long distances without refrigeration was biologically impossible.
All right, it would just curdle.
Exactly. But the trolley system bypassed that limitation with sheer velocity. The combine would race up the line, execute a synchronized handoff to the Hershey Transit System, which would then rush the raw milk directly into the Hershey Company factories for immediate processing into chocolate.
It was a proto-just-in-time manufacturing supply chain built entirely on trolley rails.
It completely revolutionized the agricultural economy of southeastern Pennsylvania.
It did. But, moving milk and Monday to Friday commuters wasn't enough to justify the massive capital expenditure of maintaining 165 miles of track. We have to look at the weekends.
So weekend traffic.
Right. And this introduces the concept of induced demand in a very deliberate corporate way. Did the CTC build lines to places people already wanted to go, or did they literally manufacture destinations out of thin air just to ensure their cars were full on Saturdays and Sundays?
It's definitely the latter. The amusement park business model was foundational to early public transportation. Most electric street railway companies of the era actively owned, managed, or leased massive amusement parks located at the terminus of their lines.
Because otherwise the cars just sit there.
Exactly. If the rolling stock sits idle on the weekend, the company bleeds capital. They needed to generate massive off-peak traffic.
So they built places like Rocky Springs Park, located to the south of the city. And the resulting volume is just staggering. The sources note that during the peak summer months, the CTC would have to assign 20 massive trolley cars to run simultaneously.
20 cars.
20 cars, back to back, just to handle the crushing crowds of patrons flocking to the roller coasters and the bathing pools. And they replicated this strategy at Conestoga Park and Chickies Park.
And they pursued niche demographics with the same aggressive infrastructure tactics, too. Consider the Rollinsville line. It branched off the main system at a junction called Mardick Forge, executing a punishing 552-foot vertical climb over just 1.25 miles.
That's incredibly steep for a rail line.
Very steep. It was pulling out of the deep gorges of the Pequea Creek to reach the heights of Rollinsville.
And the sole economic justification for building and maintaining that steep, treacherous mountain rail spur, a 10-day religious festival.
That's it.
The line operated exactly 10 days a year just to transport crowds to the annual Rollins-Hill camp meetings. If there was a concentration of humans anywhere in the county, the CTC wanted steel rails running directly underneath them.
But we must be careful not to romanticize the physical reality of riding these rural spokes.
Oh, definitely not.
Because modern rail travel implies continuously welded, deeply ballasted, laser-leveled rail beds offering a gliding ride. The rural interurban lines of the early 1900s were emphatically not that. The historical journal uses the deeply unsettling phrase casual track work to describe the engineering.
Casual track work is a terrifying euphemism when applied to a vehicle weighing tens of thousands of pounds traveling at speed.
It really is. The engineering philosophy for these rural spurs was speed and low cost, not comfort. The tracks closely followed the natural, rugged, undulating topography of the landscape rather than cutting through it.
So they just laid the tracks over the hills.
Right over them. And the physical physics of an undampened trolley car hitting these dips and sways at speed meant the cars would pitch and roll violently. The lateral and vertical G-forces were so pronounced that passengers frequently suffered from acute motion sickness.
Literally getting seasick on a trolley. And it was such a universally recognized, visceral experience that it embedded itself in national pop culture.
Oh, the comic strip.
Yeah. The famous newspaper comic strip Toonerville Folks, which ran for nearly 50 years, starting in 1908, featured the Toonerville trolley that met all the trains. And it was driven by this grizzled conductor on a bouncy, rickety car, famously drawn physically launching off the undulating tracks.
Like catching air.
Exactly. And the creator of that strip modeled it directly on his experiences riding these specific hill and dale rural interurban trolley lines in Pennsylvania.
But, while the passengers were battling motion sickness on the casual tracks, the trolley executives were engaged in a literal, physical, corporate war.
Oh, the turf wars.
Yes. The establishment monopolies were not going to simply allow electric trolleys to siphon off their local passenger and light freight revenue.
And the establishment, in this context, being the colossal steam-powered juggernaut of the era. The Pennsylvania Railroad, or the PRR.
Right.
The power dynamics between the entrenched steam monopoly and the nimble, disruptive electric trolleys escalated from boardroom injunctions to actual physical violence and sabotage right there in the mud.
The PRR viewed the trolley not as a novelty, but as an existential threat to their short-haul dominance. They weaponized their existing property rights to strangle the trolley's expansion.
Give us an example.
Well, in 1905, the Lancaster and Corryville Railway Company, which was a component of the trolley network, was grading their roadbed near the village of Camargo. And they laid their tracks across a minor sliver of ground previously owned by the railroad.
And the PRR didn't just send a cease and desist letter, right?
No, not at all. They sent a crew of railroad enforcers the very next day who physically attacked the site.
Wow.
Violently tearing the newly laid trolley cracks out of the ground by force. The trolley company had to scramble to the courts to file an emergency legal injunction just to stop the PRR from physically assaulting their construction crews.
That is wild. And the extortion took other forms as well. Back in 1893, when the original traction company was surveying the Columbia route, their line required crossing a bridge that spanned the PRR tracks in Mountville.
The Mountville Bridge.
Right. And the Pennsylvania Railroad flatly refused them trackage rights across the bridge.
So what did they do?
The logistical workaround was completely absurd. A trolley would arrive at the bridge. Every single passenger had to disembark, walk a full block across the bridge on foot over the steam trains, and then board a completely different waiting trolley car on the other side to continue the journey.
That's so inefficient.
And the friction became so intolerable that the trolley company was ultimately forced to pay the PRR $10,000, which is an absolutely exorbitant ransom in 1893, just to purchase the bridge outright so they could finally connect their own tracks.
This corporate friction illustrates the intense pressures of rapid infrastructure growth, but, corporate sabotage was manageable compared to the inherent physical dangers of the technology itself.
The technology was advancing too fast.
Exactly. The ambition of the route planners and the sheer weight of the rolling stock were expanding far faster than safety regulations or electrical engineering could safely support.
And there is no better microcosm of this danger than the Lancaster and York Furnace Street Railway Company, enshrined in local folklore as the Pequea Trolley.
Ah, the Pequea line.
It was a 12.5-mile independent line unattached to the massive CTC monopoly, and it was promoted by an ambitious developer named Frederick Schaff, who dreamed of turning the Susquehanna River at Pequea into a booming summer resort.
And aesthetically, the route was a masterpiece. It originated at the Normal School in Millersville, bridged the Conestoga River, threaded its way through abandoned silver mines, passed directly beneath the towering 150-foot Mardock Forge trestle bridge, and clung precariously to the winding, steep banks of the Pequea Gorge.
It sounds beautiful.
It was, and remarkably cheap, too, like a 5-cent fare in the 1920s, rising to only 15 cents by the time it closed in 1930.
But operating heavy machinery in that rugged environment was chaotic. Beyond the frequent delays caused by, herds of cows meandering onto the tracks, the line suffered from a fundamental flaw in early direct current electrical transmission.
The voltage drops.
Right. Let's apply a basic analogy here. Imagine trying to water a massive, sprawling garden using a single, leaky, mile-long hose. By the time the water reaches the nozzle at the far end of the property, the pressure is just a mere trickle.
That perfectly describes the voltage drop on the Pequea line. Direct current loses significant voltage over long distances unless it's boosted by expensive substations, which, this independent line lacked.
So what happened when they hit a hill?
Well, when a heavy trolley car packed with passengers hit a steep incline miles from the powerhouse, the voltage would plummet. The massive electric motors underneath the floorboards would simply stall out, completely lacking the necessary amperage to overcome gravity.
And the solution was brutally low-tech.
Yeah.
The motorman would halt the car, force the paying passengers to disembark, and make them physically put their shoulders against the back of the trolley to push it up the hill until the tracks leveled out.
Could you imagine paying for a ticket and then having to push the trolley?
I'd be furious. But the physical integration of the trolley into the harsh landscape naturally generated really rich local folklore. The route passed the 170-foot Colemanville covered bridge, the second longest in the county, and navigated a specific stretch of water known as Susie's Hole.
The mythology surrounding Susie's Hole is a prime example of how infrastructure absorbs the dark projections of the community.
Oh, for sure.
Local old-timers swear the spot is named for a woman who was violently swept away and drowned in the treacherous rapids near the tracks. But the historical journal points out a fascinating geographical contradiction.
Which is?
The actual map coordinates designated as Susie's Hole don't point to the churning, dangerous rapids at all, but rather to a very placid, tranquil swimming area just upstream.
That's hilarious. But whether tranquil or treacherous, the trolley line was the lifeblood of that gorge. People physically altered the landscape to access it, building homes directly into the steep hillsides, with massive wooden staircases descending dizzying bluffs just to reach the trolley roadbed.
It was a vital, romanticized lifeline.
It was. But that romanticism often masked the terrifying reality of early transit mechanics.
Absolutely.
And that terrifying reality is exactly what we have to confront when we look at Sunday, August 9, 1896. This is the inflection point, the tragedy that bankrupts the Pennsylvania Traction Company and leaves a permanent traumatic scar on the county.
The Clinesville disaster is a harrowing case study in catastrophic systems failure. It is what happens when compounding human error, inadequate mechanical fail-safes, and a bizarre, unpredictable environmental variable all intersect at the exact same moment.
We need to break down the timeline of this evening minute by minute to understand the physics of the failure.
Okay, let's set the scene.
It's a sweltering, humid Sunday evening. Up at Chickies Park, which sits high on a bluff overlooking the river, a massive crowd is gathered for a sacred band concert playing spiritual music. The park is absolutely packed. But as the concert nears its end, a severe summer thunderstorm suddenly rolls in across the river.
And the operational protocol of the era dictated an immediate halt to trolley movements during thunderstorms.
Because of the electricity.
Right. The electrical grid was highly primitive and largely unshielded. A lightning strike on the overhead wires could easily surge down the trolley pole and electrocute the motorman or literally ignite the wooden car. Therefore, the trolley dispatched from Marietta to collect the massive crowd at Chickies Park was intentionally delayed.
So the crowd at the park is getting soaked. They are tired, they are impatient, and they are desperate to get home. Finally, the storm breaks, the lightning stops, and car number 61 of the Pennsylvania Traction Company arrives.
Car 61.
Yes, it is a small, top-heavy, four-wheeled trolley car. The crew consists of motorman Adam Follinger and conductor Harry Hershey. And the engineering specifications for car 61 mandate a maximum safe seating capacity of 28 people.
But the delayed arrival triggers a panic. The soaked, desperate crowd swarms the vehicle. The ensuing crush leads to a catastrophic overloading of the car's physical tolerances.
How many got on?
The historical investigation estimated that as many as 80 adults and children wedged themselves onto that tiny vehicle.
80 people on a 28-person car.
Yes, every seat was occupied, the center aisle was packed shoulder to shoulder, and passengers were even clinging precariously to the front and rear exterior platforms, literally hanging over the tracks.
They are operating at nearly 3 times the vehicle's maximum legal weight limit. The suspension is bottomed out. The center of gravity is dangerously high.
A recipe for disaster.
At approximately 10 p.m., in pitch blackness, the massively overloaded Car 61 begins its downhill run toward the town of Columbia. About a mile outside of town, they approach a rural road crossing called Clinesville. 2 women in the crushed interior signal the conductor that they need to disembark.
So Motorman Follinger applies the mechanical brakes, but the physics of the situation are entirely against him.
Too much weight.
Exactly. The car possesses thousands of pounds of excess kinetic energy due to the massive overload. Furthermore, the steep steel rails are slick with fresh rainwater from the thunderstorm, drastically reducing the coefficient of friction. The brake shoes clamp down on the steel wheels, but the immense momentum causes the locked wheels to simply slide along the wet rails.
So they just hydroplane.
Pretty much. The trolley skids 150 feet past the Clinesville crossing before finally grinding to a halt.
And this simple missed stop is the first domino in a lethal chain. Follinger, trying to accommodate the passengers, makes a fatal operational decision. He puts the heavy electric motor into reverse and slowly backs the overloaded trolley up the steep grade to return to the Clinesville depot.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
The women disembark. But now the trolley is poised dead still on a steep downward sloping rail carrying 78 people. Follinger disengages the reverse, applies forward power, and gravity instantly takes hold.
It drops.
The impossibly heavy car surges forward, rapidly picking up speed down the hill. But the mechanical crisis is about to collide with a biological anomaly.
This is the part that is just unbelievable. As the trolley hurtles down the dark grade, accelerating rapidly, it encounters a section of the track completely obscured by millions of potato bugs.
Wait, potato bugs?
Millions of them. The exact entomological reason for this massive swarm remains speculative. Perhaps the sudden drop in barometric pressure or the heavy rain drove them from the surrounding fields onto the elevated rail bed, but millions of these hard-shelled insects carpeted the steel rails.
Oh my God. As the thousands of pounds of steel wheels crush millions of these insects, the immense pressure essentially extracts their internal lipids, creating a highly effective biological grease.
Yes, an oleaginous compound that instantly coats both the rails and the smooth steel wheels of the trolley.
The slick rainwater was bad enough, but this organic grease drops the coefficient of friction to 0.
Whatever marginal stopping power the mechanical brakes possessed is instantaneously obliterated. The brakes are fully engaged, but the trolley is in a total, uncontrolled freefall down the steep grade.
And the violent, uncontrolled acceleration introduces severe lateral instability. The short wheelbase of the four-wheel car begins to violently buck and sway.
And that extreme bouncing causes the trolley pole. You know, the vital spring-loaded metal arm reaching up to the overhead electrical wire to draw power to violently snap off the wire and flail in the air.
And the moment that pole detaches, the circuit is broken. The overhead interior lights of the trolley instantly extinguish. Imagine the sheer claustrophobic terror inside that car. You are crammed against 70 other panicked people. You are plunging down a steep mountain grade. You can hear the brakes screaming uselessly against the wheels, and suddenly you are plunged into absolute suffocating darkness.
The screaming begins. The runaway trolley accelerates to an estimated 60 miles per hour in the pitch black.
60 miles an hour in 1896.
And the physics of a top-heavy, overloaded four-wheel vehicle traveling at 60 miles per hour dictate that it cannot physically negotiate a curve. The centripetal force is simply too great. When Car 61 hits the sharp curve at the bottom of the Clinesville Hill, the flanges of the wheels violently jump the rails.
The trolley basically becomes a 60-mile-per-hour unguided missile. It careens wildly off the tracks and tears across a dirt road. It violently snaps a thick wooden gatepost clean off its foundations, falls onto its side, and slides for 75 feet through the dirt, plowing a massive trench.
It's just tearing the environment apart.
It smashes laterally into a tree, ricochets off, snaps wooden trolley pole in half, and then plunges over a 30-foot embankment into the darkness. It comes to rest completely upside down, its massive electric motors and steel wheels spinning freely in the night air above the crushed wooden cabin.
And the localized trauma was staggering. 6 people were killed in the crushed wreckage, including motorman Adam Follinger, who was trapped in the front vestibule.
And the mayor, right?
Yes. H.H. Hayes, the sitting mayor of Columbia, who just happened to be a passenger. Another 68 people, virtually every other soul on board, were injured, many suffering severe fractures and lacerations.
So what does this all mean? The fallout from August 9, 1896 was absolute. The staggering liability and the massive damage claims from 74 victims instantly bankrupted the Pennsylvania Traction Company. But the deeper impact was on the engineering philosophy of the entire transit industry.
It had to change.
Right. The Clinesville disaster laid bare the fatal flaw of early transit. Reliance on human judgment under pressure, overloading the car, reversing on a slick grade. These were human decisions that mechanical brakes couldn't overcome once physics took over.
It forced a massive paradigm shift. The transit industry realized that safety could no longer rely on the behavioral discipline of conductors and motormen. They needed to engineer the human entirely out of the safety equation.
Make it idiot-proof.
Exactly. They needed fail-safes that operated via immutable laws of pneumatics and mechanics, not human reflexes.
Which brings us precisely to the golden era of the trolley system, spanning the 1910s through the 1920s, and the introduction of a specific piece of technology designed to prevent another Clinesville.
The Birney safety car.
Yes, the
Birney safety car, introduced to the Lancaster lines in 1920, was marketed as an absolute marvel of urban transit engineering. The Conestoga Traction Company was so desperate to change the public narrative around trolley safety that on October 5, 1920, they orchestrated a massive press event.
A PR stunt.
A huge one. They loaded a cadre of local newspapermen onto a trial run of the new Birney car on the 7th Ward route, specifically to demonstrate its array of automated, foolproof safety features.
They were determined to prove that a runaway dark trolley was a nightmare of the past. The crown jewel of the Birney's engineering was the dead man switch.
Such a grim name.
It is, but let's break down exactly how this brilliant pneumatic failsafe worked. The motorman's control handle wasn't just a throttle, it was a pressurized valve. To keep the trolley moving, the motorman had to apply constant, active, downward physical pressure on the handle, pushing against a strong spring.
And the engineering elegance lies in its passivity. If the motorman suffered a massive heart attack, if he fainted from the heat, or if he simply panicked and threw his hands up, the spring instantly forced the handle up.
It defaults to safe.
Right. This action mechanically vented the air pressure in the control line.
And that sudden loss of pneumatic pressure triggered an immediate cascading sequence of automated safety protocols. The electrical power to the massive drive motors was instantly severed.
And the potato bug problem was solved too.
Yes. Simultaneously, gravity-fed hoppers automatically dumped abrasive sand directly onto the steel rails, directly in front of the wheels, to instantaneously maximize the coefficient of friction. The pneumatic air brakes automatically locked down with maximum force. And finally, the pneumatic locks on the passenger doors automatically depressurized, allowing panicked passengers to simply push the doors open to escape.
It was a masterstroke of passenger safety. It also featured automatic, pneumatically controlled double doors, allowing synchronized boarding and exiting, and brightly illuminated destination signs visible from hundreds of yards away at night.
But when we examine the broader economic impact, the Birney car reveals a sharp dual edge.
Oh, absolutely.
It was brilliantly marketed as a safety revolution for the passenger, but on the corporate balance sheet, it was a ruthless, highly calculated instrument of labor optimization.
The Birney car was explicitly designed for one-man operation. Prior to 1920, every single heavy electric streetcar mandated a two-man crew for safe and efficient operation.
A motorman and a conductor.
Right. A motorman dedicated solely to driving and monitoring the track, and a conductor who roamed the aisle, collected fares, maintained order, and managed the rear door. But the Birney integrated the fare box directly next to the motorman's controls at the front door.
And the economic implications were immediate and brutal. Overnight, the Conestoga Traction Company possessed the technological capability to essentially halve its onboard labor costs. The motorman was now forced to drive the heavy vehicle and act as the cashier, taking fares as passengers boarded through the single front entrance. The conductor was entirely engineered out of existence.
The parallels to our modern economy are blindingly obvious.
They really are. When you look at the anxiety surrounding artificial intelligence today, or the looming deployment of fully autonomous long-haul trucking networks, or even the ubiquitous automated self-checkout kiosks replacing cashiers at every grocery store, it is the exact same corporate dynamic playing out a century later.
It's the same playbook.
Management introduces a piece of technology marketed to the consumer as faster, safer, and infinitely more convenient. But the direct intended outcome is the wholesale removal of human livelihoods from the operational ledger. The Bernie safety car was the automated self-checkout kiosk of 1920.
And armed with these massive savings in labor costs and a highly efficient, reliable fleet, the Conestoga Traction Company entered its absolute zenith.
The peak of the empire.
The sheer scale of their operation in the early 1920s is difficult to comprehend when looking at the same city grid today. To understand their dominance, look at the infrastructure they constructed merely to house their rolling stock. In 1910, they erected a colossal new car barn and centralized administration building on East Chestnut Street.
The physical footprint of this facility is staggering. It measured 150 feet wide by an incredible 500 feet long. It contained enough internal trackage to securely house 100 massive trolley cars indoors, protected from the elements simultaneously.
100 cars.
But what truly stands out in the sources is the internal corporate culture it fostered. This massive brick structure wasn't just an industrial garage. It was a fully self-contained ecosystem for the transit workforce.
The architectural layout reflects the all-encompassing nature of the job. The entire second floor of this massive structure was dedicated to employee welfare and retention.
They had pool tables, right?
Yeah. It housed a sprawling recreation center featuring billiard and pool tables, extensive libraries stocked with the latest magazines and newspapers, massive locker rooms, highly modernized washrooms, and most notably, rows of company-provided beds.
And the inclusion of beds speaks volumes about the physical demands placed on these men. The transit system was the circulatory system of the county. It simply could not stop.
Ever.
During severe weather events, massive winter blizzards, or torrential summer thunderstorms that washed mud over the tracks, the maintenance crews, motormen, and surviving conductors were required to work brutal, unending shifts to keep the lines clear.
Right, they couldn't just go home.
Exactly. Instead of allowing exhausted men to trudge miles home in a blizzard, the company provided beds so they could sleep on site for a few hours before being thrust right back onto the lines.
It was an immersive, grueling way of life that generated immense pride and staggering operational volume. The ridership statistics from this era are awe-inspiring. By 1924, this localized network was transporting an astonishing 19 million passengers annually.
19 million.
19 million fares collected in a county predominantly populated by dispersed dairy farmers and small-town merchants.
The financial gravity of moving 19 million people a year made the CTC virtually omnipotent in local politics and economics. They were so central to the identity of Lancaster that in April 1925 they abandoned their massive Chestnut Street administration offices to move their corporate headquarters into the newly constructed Greased building right on Penn Square.
And the Greased building was not just an office, it was a monument. It was a true modern skyscraper, the tallest structure in Lancaster, named in honor of Congressman W.W. Grist, who happened to be a former president of the Traction Company.
The symbolism is heavy-handed, but completely accurate. By September of 1925, the CTC commanded an army of 615 employees, maintained an active fleet of 154 heavy trolley cars, and operated exactly 165 miles of electrified track. They were quite literally looking down upon the city from the highest vantage point possible, absolute masters of the multi-million-dollar electrified empire they had built.
Yet history is deeply ironic. The years 1924 and 1925 represent the absolute, undisputed peak of their power. They appeared utterly invincible.
But the clock was ticking.
The technological virus that would completely eradicate their empire in less than 2 decades was already driving on the dirt roads right alongside their steel tracks.
The internal combustion engine, the mass-produced affordable automobile. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the speed of the trolley system's collapse is breathtaking.
It really is.
It required 50 years of grinding labor, massive capital debt, and brilliant engineering to build this 165-mile electrified empire. It would take less than 15 years to completely dismantle it.
The financial cliff the company drives off in the early 1930s is terrifyingly steep. Just 6 short years after moving into the luxurious penthouse suites of the Greased building, the company is staring down the barrel of total insolvency.
The Great Depression didn't help.
No, the macroeconomic devastation of the Great Depression certainly accelerated the decline by squeezing working-class capital and severely reducing leisure travel to places like Rocky Springs. But the structural assassin was Henry Ford.
The Model T.
The proliferation of the affordable automobile fundamentally broke the trolley's monopoly on motion. By August 1931, the financial hemorrhage was so severe that the company was forced into a desperate existential reorganization. They legally changed their name from the Conestoga Traction Company to the Conestoga Transportation Company.
That one-word shift in vocabulary from traction to transportation is the death knell of the rails. Traction inextricably links your corporate identity to steel wheels gripping steel rails. Transportation is a panicked pivot that leaves the door wide open for rubber tires on asphalt.
The new corporate president, Colonel John H. Wickersham, recognized the existential threat. He imported a renowned Eastern utility and transit expert from Boston named Albert C. Ritchie to conduct a ruthless top-to-bottom audit of the entire Lancaster system.
And Ritchie's report was brutal.
Ritchie's final report delivered a brutal, unvarnished verdict. The rigid, capital-intensive trolley system could not mathematically survive the onslaught of the automobile. He recommended immediate draconian austerity measures and a rapid wholesale transition to internal combustion motor buses to compete with the speed and route flexibility of personal cars.
And of course, the very first casualty of corporate austerity is always the worker. In December 1931, management forced every single employee from the executives down to the track layers to accept a mandatory 10% reduction in their wages just to keep the company's head above water.
Which is devastating.
And inside that massive, proud 1910 car barn, the physical desecration began. Crews started ripping the heavy steel tracks out of the floor, pouring thick concrete directly into the trolley maintenance pits to make flat floors for rubber tires, and sinking massive, highly flammable gasoline storage tanks into the earth to fuel the first fleet of 10 21-passenger motor buses.
When analyzing this collapse, it is vital to understand the underlying economic and psychological forces that killed the trolley. It wasn't simply a failure of corporate management or a temporary dip in ridership. It was a profound, irreversible societal shift toward hyper-individualism, enabled by a massive shift in public policy.
But I'm going to push back on the idea that this was purely a psychological shift toward individualism.
Oh.
Yeah, the game was fundamentally rigged against the trolleys by municipal and federal policy. The fixed rails of the trolley were incredibly capital-intensive to maintain, and the transit company had to pay for every inch of steel, wire, and tie out of their own pockets. The automobile, on the other hand, enjoyed a massive hidden subsidy.
That's a very fair point. The roads.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The government used taxpayer dollars to pave the roads, build the bridges, and maintain the infrastructure that the cars and private buses drove on for free. The trolley was forced to maintain a private utility while competing against a heavily subsidized public road network. It was an economic impossibility.
That is a highly accurate assessment of the asymmetrical economics at play. And when the economics are that fragile, nature often accelerates the inevitable abandonment.
Mother Nature steps in.
Right. In March 1932, a massive late-winter snowstorm absolutely slammed Lancaster County. The deep freeze and heavy ice severely damaged the physical trolley tracks and overhead wires on the Elizabethtown route.
And the company just lifted the bill and said, nope.
They looked at the exorbitant repair bill required to fix their private infrastructure and simply refused. They left the steel tracks broken in the snow, immediately petitioned the Public Service Commission for abandonment, and started running rubber-tired buses on the publicly plowed roads permanently.
It was death by 1,000 cuts. By the mid-1930s, the long rural spokes of the Great Wheel were being aggressively chopped off. The Blue Ball Line, the Adamstown Line, the Marietta Line, all systematically replaced by buses in April 1932.
The Coatesville line suffered a particularly agonizing slow death, being progressively shortened to Gap, then cut back to Lehman Place before finally converting entirely to buses in 1935.
The only interruption to this rapid dismantling was a bizarre zombie-like resurrection mandated by World War II.
Right, the gas shortages.
Yeah, the extreme wartime rationing of gasoline and the severe shortage of rubber for tires forced the federal government to intervene. The Office of Defense Transportation actually ordered the Conestoga Transportation Company to bring several mothballed electric trolley routes back from the dead in 1942 and 1943 to conserve fuel.
But it was merely a temporary stay of execution. The moment the Axis power surrendered and cheap gasoline began flowing freely across America again, the final phase of trolley abandonment was executed with ruthless speed. the company officially designated February 10, 1947, as the date to motorize virtually the entire remaining city grid.
And here is where the abstract history of infrastructure transition crystallizes into a deeply poignant human narrative. Because a transit system isn't just copper wire and steel rails. It is the human beings who dedicate their lives to operating it.
The human cost.
On that brisk morning in February 1947, 4 veteran motormen arrived at the barn facing an impossible choice. Their names were Alonzo Donahue, Lorenzo D. Douglas, Warren E. Evans, and J. Frank Rainier.
These 4 men weren't just employees. They were the living, breathing institutional memory of the entire century of transit.
Exactly. Look at Alonzo Donahue. He was 73 years old. He had devoted 52 years of his life to the rails, starting way back in 1895 with the doomed, ambitious Pennsylvania Traction Company. He survived the Clinesville bankruptcy fallout. He mastered the pneumatic complexity of the Bernie safety cars. He drove through the glorious 19 million passenger zenith of 1924, and he survived the 10% wage cuts of the Depression.
And Warren Evans had actually laid the literal heavy steel tracks for the Coatesville route with his own bare hands back in 1906. Lorenzo Douglas had spent 21 years of his life navigating the violent sways of the Elizabethtown run.
And management, perhaps out of a sense of obligation, offered to retrain these elderly men to drive the new fleet of rubber-tired internal combustion gasoline buses. But for men of this tenure, the trolley was far more than a paycheck. It was their fundamental identity.
They possessed a tactile sensory understanding of the massive machines. They knew the specific hum of the overhead electric wire, the complex rhythm of the steel wheels on casual tracks, the exact nuanced air pressure required to feather the Bernie pneumatic brake systems.
The thought of abandoning that mastery to sit behind the steering wheel of a noisy, vibrating, foul-smelling gasoline bus on a paved road was simply unacceptable. Rather than compromise their identity, all 4 of those men walked into the supervisor's office on February 10th, 1947, and chose to resign.
They all retired on the same day.
Yes, they retired on the exact same day. When their beloved trolleys left the tracks forever, they left with them. It is a moment of profound, quiet dignity amidst the chaos of technological progress.
The final dying gasp of trolley operations in Lancaster terminated entirely a few months later. On the evening of September 21st, 1947, the final cars on the Rocky Springs and 7th Ward routes were permanently shuttered, breaking the electrical circuit for good.
And the method the company utilized to dispose of this multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art infrastructure is incredibly visceral. It feels almost barbaric in its efficiency.
What do you do with hundreds of obsolete trolleys?
Right. What do you do with a massive fleet of hundreds of massive, heavy, suddenly obsolete electric vehicles? A tiny handful were donated to historical societies, but the vast majority of the proud fleet met a violently spectacular end.
The disposal protocol was brutally pragmatic. Maintenance crews drove the heavy cars one last time down the long steel, spoke to Rocky Springs Park.
They drove them to the exact same amusement park that used to require 20 cars a day just to handle the joyous summer crowds, the epicenter of the empire's leisure and profit.
And then what?
They drove the cars into the park, unhooked the trolley poles from the wire, and used heavy machinery to physically flip the massive trolleys off the tracks, tipping them onto their sides in the dirt. And then they doused the heavy wooden bodies in flammable liquid and set them on fire.
They just burned them.
They burned the beautiful wooden cabins to ash, melted the complex copper wiring, and sent salvage crews into the cooling embers to harvest whatever heavy scrap metal survived the flames.
It is a stark, almost apocalyptic visual representation of how ruthlessly a society discards its past to make way for the future. A miraculous technology that pulled an entire county out of the sucking mud, an intricate system that commanded millions of dollars in speculative venture capital and dictated the daily movements of millions of human lives, was ultimately reduced to a towering bonfire by the side of a deserted amusement park.
And out of that massive, sprawling 165-mile empire, exactly one lone survivor remains from the CTC era. The Mannheim Historical Society managed to preserve a single 1926 model trolley car. Today, it runs on exactly one isolated block of track just on Sundays during the summer. One single block as a ghost of a system that used to bind the entire county together.
To synthesize this incredible life cycle, the Lancaster trolley system was an engineering marvel that completely restructured human geography. It defeated the agonizing friction of the rural mud. It engineered a bizarre but highly efficient cultural bridge, seamlessly integrating traditional Amish agriculture with urban manufacturing via the combines.
It survived a lot, too.
It weathered violent corporate sabotage from steam monopolies, survived catastrophic, deadly mechanical failures, and successfully brought 19 million people together at its absolute peak. And yet, the entirety of this vast empire, from its humble horse-drawn birth to its fiery, violent death, transpired completely within the span of a single human lifetime.
Which brings us back to you, the listener, sitting at that red light. It is incredibly easy to look at the infrastructure around you as just sterile concrete, steel beams, and asphalt. But it's not. Infrastructure is a living, breathing ecosystem.
It dictates everything.
It dictates exactly where you can afford to live, who you are able to interact with on a daily basis, and what commodities you value. It literally shapes your entire worldview. The people of Lancaster in 1924, watching 100 trolleys roll out of the Chestnut Street barn, could no more imagine a world without the trolley than you can imagine a world without the smartphone in your pocket.
The story of the trolley raises a profound, unsettling question about the illusion of permanence. We have a deep psychological tendency to view our current technological and infrastructural landscape as the final, ultimate draft of human history.
But it never is.
No. The sudden rise and complete eradication of the trolley empire proves that even the most dominant, deeply rooted, multi-million-dollar systems can completely evaporate in a historical blink of an eye when a more flexible technology arrives.
So as you finally take your foot off the brake and drive through that intersection, I want to leave you with a lingering thought to mull over. Look around at the sprawling, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure we rely on so heavily today. Look at the massive concrete, multi-lane interstate highways carving through the hearts of our cities.
Look at our sprawling, glass-enclosed airport terminals.
Or even the millions of miles of microscopic fiber optic cables buried directly under the asphalt you were driving on. Based on the spectacular, world-changing rise and the fiery, forgotten fall of Lancaster's trolley empire, what indispensable, permanent piece of our modern world will our grandchildren be tearing out of the ground, flipping over in the dirt, and leaving behind 50 years from now?
It's a question that completely reframes how you view everything outside your window. Thank you for joining us on this exploration.
Yes, thank you for taking this deep dive into the sources with us. Until next time, keep looking beneath the surface.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.